The title of the session is The Death of SEO and the Rise of the Brand Story. We're going to explore that topic a bit to see what we make of it, what our panelists say, and put that in the context of where all this is going for the profession. I see a lot of content being written and talked about out there along the lines of SEO is dead. Some of the same people who say press releases are dead, for instance. So is SEO dead? That's one of the questions we may well talk about at some length. But I think to start with, we need to be clear in a sense of what SEO is. When I ask people in our profession, do you know what SEO is? I either get no, or I get a definition which is different if I ask 5 people. So I want to be sure when we start off this conversation that we all are reasonably clear in a common way, a consensus, if you will, of what SEO is today. That will enable us to see what we think it ought to be in the future, what role it may play in the future, which is indeed the whole point of this event today. So I'd like to introduce you to our panel. Alex Myers. Alex? He's the managing director and co-founder of Manifest London, and I'll let Alex tell a little bit more about himself in a second. Jem Griff, managing director of The Crowd and I. Max Tatton-Brown, agency founder of Augur, technology writer as well. Carlos Menezes, managing director at Quirk UK, a top 4 agency based in South Africa. Is that correct? Yep. And Lukasz Zelezny, who's the head of organic acquisition at Uswitch. Now, Lukasz might be on the spot a bit because his LinkedIn profile says he has 99 plus skills for SEO. So he could be our expert opinion maker on this topic. We'll find out. Won't put you on the spot too much, Lukasz, though. Let's start off with defining SEO. And I want to just bear with me a second while I tell you what Wikipedia says about SEO. Search engine optimization is the process of affecting the visibility of a website or a web page in a search engine's unpaid results, often referred to as natural, organic, or earned results. In general, the earlier or higher ranked in the search engine results, and more frequently a site appears in the search results list, the more visitors it will receive from the search engine's users. SEO may target different kinds of search, including image search, local search, video search, academic search, news search, and industry-specific vertical search engines. I hope that's clear to all of you what SEO is, according to Wikipedia. Let me throw this question straight away to the panel. Is that a good definition for today? Anyone care to comment on that straight away?
I think SEO has quite a technical baggage problem, like in its history. So because so much of it early on was about the on-site stuff and then keeping up with what was going on in the algorithm and then doing loads of experiments on your kind of own time as an SEO agency and then offering that insight to your clients, I'd say today it's much less about the techie side, so much less about like Google sending out spiders to index the web, and much more about the human side and the side of great material and then turning your readers into spiders for that content. So people are the new spiders. Okay, so does that fit? Does that fit with that first bit about the process affecting the visibility of a website, or is that simply too incomprehensible for normal people to understand that?
I think, can you hear me? Yeah. Oh, lovely. I think this is very top level.
Yep.
But somehow what you said, it is that we need to get to this level. And right now, the SEO is very much about the on-page, how the technical stuff is done. And obviously there was lots of jargon back in the days and lots of this kind of magician wizards had to be in a company to optimize the website. However, the good side of this is that right now there is a couple of really cool tools that you don't need to be a very techy guy to understand what you need to do. Just an example, title tags of your pages are too long. You know how to shorten. You have a WordPress, you have different CMS. You're just going page by page and you shorten
Lukasz,
this.
Let's talk about the detail of that, because what you said is quite interesting. I think that leads into maybe some of the things we have to do to make SEO useful to us as we go forward. This definition to me is not for normal people like us, frankly, to understand what SEO is. I mean, I was brought up in the days back in the mid-90s when SEO was all about manipulating Google PageRank and doing kind of magical things with URLs to drive traffic to websites. Is that not what it is anymore?
I
I think that there's, from a strategic level, it's basically SEO is the antithesis of the field of dreams model. It's not if you build it, they will come.
Okay.
Like, that does not happen. You have to take people to places. You have to take places to people. And if you're going to boil down what optimization is, it's doing exactly that. And I think the idea of SEO as a technical skill, as a route, or as a channel, or as a profession, isn't actually structured around the technology or the tools or anything like that. It is about ideas, but it's about actually then giving those ideas the oxygen that they need to disseminate, basically.
So that fits the title of this debate, the death of SEO and the rise of the brand story. So it's not about the technical element anymore. Do I understand you right there? It's not about the technical aspect of it so much from our points of view as communicators. It's more about that experience we're talking about, to engage people with your content in ways that are what? Natural, authentic, perhaps? Storytelling?
I think if you boil it down to, I totally shit at quoting people, but Google have like some truths.
Yeah, they do.
And one of the truths is it all starts with the user and everything follows that.
I thought there was only a single version of the truth, actually. Sorry, that was earlier.
Oh yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Oh, please, let's not
No,
go there.
let's not go there. Let's not go there. Okay.
Yeah, SEO is about advertising value equivalent.
Whoa, okay.
No, I think their idea about the user is often forgotten in SEO. The idea is that it's a person. And the rise of the brand story is that if you've got a story, then actually digital media allows that to disseminate much further through like a democratized group of people online, where if it resonates with people, they will share it and it grows. The reason why people talk about the death of SEO is you can't make people do things through a tool, you know? Whereas it used to be about making websites and algorithms do things.
Okay. Jem, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I think so. If I look at it from how my clients see it as well, there's two sides of things. There are still some techie things that you need to do that, so I wouldn't necessarily be able to do off the bat without like looking it up. And then there's the content side of things, which is still about trying to get your clients. So, for example, one of my clients is Hassle.com. It's an online marketplace for cleaners. They're fighting for space when someone searches cleaners in London to get to the top of the organic searches in Google. So we still have to do things to get them to the top. I think the difference now is SEO people used to be able to game Google and game the system to be able to get them there through various different methods. And now it's more authentic. So you have to create content that gets them there in a more authentic way rather than in a game in the system type way.
Okay, so if I understand that, so I see your train of thought, which I find attractive actually, because I think the letters SEO are part of the problem for us as communicators, let's say. If we were all IT folk and geeks, we'd probably be natural with that. But you then introduce something which I think is at the heart of where this is going, which is that all-embracing element of engagement, again, the title, the rise of the brand story. Are we seeing that, do you think, translated into the rise of native advertising, for example, the rise of sponsored content, to use a very old-fashioned phrase, that is transparent and open, supposedly? Is that part of where this is moving to, do you think?
Yeah, I can give you a really practical example again, staying with Hassle.com. So from an old school SEO point of view, they have a SEO agency because they believe that it's still technical, which is part of the problem, and I fight against that on a daily basis. But they produce infographics about like, I don't know, dirtiest towns in the world, or hacks of something that's completely unrelated to the business. So it's moving away from just creating content for content's sake and moving towards, okay, if you want to own home hacks, so to speak, and you don't want to be seen as cleaning, then what are people actually searching for that we can write blog posts about that's useful, rather than just trying to include links and search words to get them up the ranks.
Carlos, what's your view on this?
To go back to your original question in terms of what SEO is, at its most fundamental, the objective of it is to get the most relevant content ranking for relevant search terms within Google or within another search engine. I mean, that's it. There's a bit more nuance when you start becoming a practitioner and you can start crafting search journeys and matching up search queries to UX, etc. But at its most fundamental, it's very, very simple. And frankly, there's 3 ways of doing that. That's by making sure that your site and your content is visible within the search engines, making sure it's relevant to whoever's actually searching for it in the first place, and making sure it's got more authority than anybody else is trying to rank for the same keywords as well. Now, back in the day, trying to achieve all of those when Google was a much less sophisticated beast than it is today, involved a lot of voodoo, which scared a lot of people. People who are good at content aren't necessarily good at tech. They don't understand algorithms. People who do understand algorithms don't necessarily understand branding, content, craft, nuance. It's very rare finding agencies or collections of these individuals who actually get both of them together. Now Google has become a lot more sophisticated, and the elements that would normally fall to SEO and would normally affect content being visible are wrapped into CMSs, are wrapped into big data consulting projects, are wrapped into IT departments and internal teams. The authority side of things used to be seen. More links, great. That'll get us more authority. Will get us high search engine results. We all know the fallacy of that. Now, back in the day, SEO agencies would go, we'll produce an infographic because we've got to get 100 links off the back of that. What nobody knew is when they actually produced that, they weren't getting the 100 links based off the quality of that infographic, but rather because they submitted it to about 1,000 different directories or whatever it could be. That's also maturing as well. And then finally, the relevance piece, in terms of trying to match content to what people are really searching for. And you've got to ask, is an SEO agency or an SEO department best fitted to actually be able to identify that? The people who best understand Google will also happen to be the best people who can map content to what users need and to a brand essence? Probably not. So it's moving from what is a very disruptive stage in our industry, probably the most disruptive stage in our industry, and seeing agencies and companies that rode the crest of that wave to business as usual now. And that requires a very different skill set and a very different approach to what's been done previously.
Okay, so what I'm hearing so far, which is great, which is this is now where we're at. And I guess a lot like some of the other conversations we've had today, which is we need to be doing X to move it into the future. So the purpose of this debate, I don't think, is to define how we're going to do that. It's to talk more about where it's all going. And I think your point is actually most interesting. It comes down to it, I think, if I could kind of summarize it in a sense, that we have a landscape that is what I would describe as a legacy landscape because it's brought in elements of like remembering what it used to do. And the landscape has shifted dramatically. And we have this thing called content marketing or brand stories, native, all that stuff's in it. Is it not about the experience? Is it not about recognizing the shifts in consumer behavior, to use the phrase in the very broadest sense, of what people do when they discover content of whatever type it is, either actively searching it out or it's brought to them in some way, that makes them do something with that content. Either share it, comment on it, republish it, do something with it, whatever it might be, go and visit your traditional landing page and click on the download to get the brochure, whatever. Buy something even. How do we differentiate ourselves from this extremely noisy landscape without having to go through this kind of relearning curve of understanding what SEO is? Because I think the original definition, the Wikipedia one, in my view, is completely not fit for purpose today in our context. So what do we do to differentiate? How does a brand differentiate itself so in 3 years' time that they've kind of reaped the rewards of some of the learning we're talking about now they need to do? What would you advise their customers?
I don't think the answer necessarily lies within the remits of SEO itself, but I'll try and give the best answer I can to this. Firstly, in terms of not trying to learn SEO or not trying to learn all the various intricacies, frankly, there is a gap still for SEO specialists and practitioners because there's so much to learn and there can be a lot that's really a lot of value derived from those specialists. However, it's not applicable in every sense necessarily. Very often, it's just a level of hygiene that needs to permeate across. And frankly, all that you need to do is really raise the digital floor in terms of that understanding. Understand the basics and the fundamentals.
Can I interrupt you with a question?
Of course.
When you say there's so much to learn, give me 3 examples. What is there to learn then, do you think?
Specific,
Yeah,
I'll give you a
just
couple of
3
specific
examples,
ones. I imagine a couple of people here are quite familiar with schema markups. I'm sure a few people here have heard of semantic search. I'm sure a couple of people have heard of Uber Suggest as well. Now, frankly, those might be very relevant for an SEO practitioner, but they're probably not relevant for your typical content agency or your brand marketer. However, understanding that you probably need to have a meta description or a title tag that needs to be unique on most of your pages is something that's relevant for those individuals to learn.
So basically, are you saying then that everyone here needs to have some kind of grasp of what this is? Not necessarily the depth knowledge of schemas and so forth, but some of the terminology everyone here needs to be familiar with.
Yes, I think the key the key to that is demystifying it. You know, search is not a difficult thing to understand.
Right.
It is blimmin' difficult if you want to become really good at it. But for all the purposes of 99% of the people in this room, it is actually incredibly simple to understand. However, we've grown up with a bunch of SEO agencies and practitioners that try to increase their value by making it seem more confusing and more complicated than it normally is, and by trying to get more and more budget.
Okay, Alex, you.
I think all technology does is facilitate what you always want to do as a human being.
Right.
Right. So if you look at SEO as that and talk about it in those terms, in that context, then you're not talking about tools. What you're talking about is our jobs to make PR people better at what they do. So, you know, traditionally you would take content and you try and target it through digital means to as many different people as you possibly can and sending it all out. The key to actual optimization is becoming magnetic, making the journey to where you want people to go part of the story. You know, as a PR person, is how do we make the link part of the story when the SEO guys tell you that the link's important? You know, that's integral to the creative process. But the reason why everyone's travelled to somewhere that I'm not even sure is even in a London postcode, where the nearest station is actually like a cable car, is because the value of what they're going to get in the room. Like, people are willing to do things to get value from it. And that's really what optimization is how do you create content with value?
Right.
And I hate the word content, but unfortunately I can't avoid it. But how do you create something that has magnetic value? And optimization can help that, you know, working together with people who understand the more nerdier elements and the people who are the lunatics with crazy ideas. That's the important bit.
Okay, so the how we'll come back to, because you mentioned how, so I'll probably ask you how then, in that case, in a second. Let me throw this at you. I want to get your view on this. This is a comment in actually quite a good article about SEO. About why PR professionals need to integrate social and SEO by a gentleman whose name might be familiar to some of you in the US called Ron Tarosian. He founded a PR firm in New York called 5WPR. He's got quite a controversial background in some of the stuff he says. Listen to what he says about this. He says, when you get right down to it, all of what SEO tries to accomplish can easily fit into the areas covered by PR. Traditional public relations is all about publicity and advertising to build a brand. That is also what SEO is trying to accomplish. Comments? Jem, what do you reckon to that?
I think what I was actually thinking while you were reading out the questions, you might need to read it again for me to actually have specific comments, was I feel like we get stuck on things like SEO and, you know, I had a really brief chat with Sarah Hall before I came, and it was like, we're not talking about the need or what we're trying to do. So your original question before the quote that I was half listening to was about how do you stand out, how do you differentiate? Yep. And I think that we just have to become really fucking good at what we do, and I think that's the difference between now and like 5 years ago. So we don't need to, not everybody in this room needs to understand what these guys that are really good at their jobs say. I don't understand it, but I know who to go to be able to create and get the best out of what I'm trying to do for a client. When I'm trying to meet their needs, then I bring in the right people to do the right thing. And I think as the profession changes, it's not just about SEO, or we're going to have to do that with lots of different disciplines.
We're going to explore in a minute the how of your point. And I know that we've got about 15 minutes, and I want to include some time for folks out there with questions. But what I'd like to do at this juncture, and this is a compressed conversation, Lukasz, I've not come back to you at all since we started this discussion. And Max, I know, has got some things he wants to say as well. But let's look, this is where we're at. We all know there's things need to change. We need to do X, we need to do Y. We'll get onto that in just a minute. But looking ahead, what I want to ask all of you, each of you, is to offer an opinion here on that future. And I'm looking 2 years out. Let's not be silly and try and do 10-year stuff. Who the hell can do that these days? 2 years, which I think is a bit of a stretch. What does our future look like in the context of what we're talking about today in 2 years' time? Is SEO dead? Should it be a moniker we ditch it because who the hell understands it? Is it relevant in the context of this profession, where we all sit today and what we're trying to do for our clients and our employers? Where are we going to be in 2 years' time in the context of the rise of the brand story? Let me start with you, Lukasz.
So, no, SEO is not dead. Thank you. So, yeah, my background is in-house, so I was always working in a company inside. I was never working in an agency. And I think, like, right now what you can observe, there is no more silo, there is no more PR silo, SEO silo, PPC, and social media. Even this quotation you just read, there was how SEO and social media, and I could add and UX and PPC and PR and this and this. And
So it
this.
all becomes
we
integrated?
all become together. Back in the days, like 10, 15 years ago, I was thinking about SEO like, oh, give me more backlinks, give me more backlinks, more backlinks. Now I'm thinking that if you take PR, social, UX, and everything together, and you try to combine this together, this common part you can call SEO. I see myself in a second line. I'm just a supporter. Rise of brand story. If you tell me your idea, I will be like, okay, so now let me support this. It's not like SEO will say like, okay, we need to cover that keyword, we need to do this or that. That's I'm serving, and the team I'm managing in-house is serving a supportive role.
All right, thank you. Carlos, your view.
Actually, sorry, that completely echoes my sentiments. You know, SEO is a bit of a proxy for digital as an overall, and as technologies progress and ways of working progress, they become more and more invisible. Now, 150 years ago, you didn't have a chief electricity officer sitting on the board of your company, and you didn't have an electricity agency. You had electricians who were there to facilitate the delivery of certain things, to Lukasz's point, but you didn't necessarily have those people sitting around the board, or you didn't have an electricity budget. It's a tool to facilitate certain things. In terms of where I think we're going right now is we've got to adopt this into our everyday lives. The quote you read from Wikipedia, the Wikipedia one,
okay.
is probably a symptom of what the problem of the problem is. It's far too complex, and frankly,
It's written by geeks, actually.
it's written by geeks, and it's the remit of geeks, and it shouldn't be. I mean, it's not just geeks who use Google. SEO is not Google. SEO is a little piece of work that goes on in the background. Google itself is dead simple to understand. We all understand it. We use it every day. We type something into a search bar, and we get our results.
Okay, thank you. Max?
This is about to get really, really interesting, because basically for the first time, search is going to move away from just meaning Google, because you've got Apple trying to make search a thing in iOS 9, so it comes from Siri. They're trying to cut out Google. You've got deep linking coming in from Facebook and all these people. So when you do a search, wherever you do it, maybe just on your mobile device, it's going to start showing results from inside apps. And if you're cutting out this kind of optimization, even what SEOs know then doesn't become an advantage. And it gets back to being about it being really good material, and you need to optimize the readers to take actions based on it. Because if people are downloading those apps because they're finding them, they're going to recommend those. That's going to show up more in search and things. You've got things like, I think other examples of this are like City Mappers updates are probably the best PR I've seen in a long time. I was saying to the founder, because that's how they communicate with their audience. And that, you know, that if you get people downloading your apps, I think increasingly that's going to be the future of where search is coming in, and content's going to start showing up in apps a ton more.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
Yeah, I think to build on that, I completely agree. We are business consultants that actually understand people and understand how to communicate. And so part of that is understanding how to do SEO or search in whatever environment, not just on Google, but on your Apple Watch, for instance, and how you communicate within 2 seconds maybe of an update of an app rather than having 2 minutes for someone to read a blog post. So it's not about the one particular thing. I think it's just something else that we have to incorporate into what we do.
Okay, thank you. Alex?
I think if you're talking about the future and what that means, and in the general context of PR as well, and the rise of the brand story, so to speak, then SEO becomes like getting the spelling right in a press release. You don't have to talk about it. It's just something that you need to know to get right. It's not something that is integral to anything other than the technicalities of the work. But I actually disagree with the quote about what PR is, because I think, you know...
What SEO is, you mean?
Well, yeah, I mean, the rise of the brand story is because, my job in PR is to help brands change the world, live their dreams by like standing up against risk, chest out in the name of opportunity, right? The idea of the rise of the brand story is that I don't need to get someone else to tell my story if it's resonating with people. Actually, those people are joining a cause. They're not buying a product. So the difference, the future, if you're talking about in 5 years' time, our job as PR people is going to change from speaking to the media channels and trying to persuade them to tell our story to being the fucking media channel. We're building them. That's exciting. We're building a whole new future for brands. We're making the whole infrastructure of industries disintegrate with stories. And that's the power of what we can do. But that's also why digital is really important. It's that democratization of the whole process. And SEO is really important to making sure that everybody that can be engaged in your story is engaged with your story.
Right.
But that should be part and parcel of what you do across the board.
Okay, thank you all. We've got the how, which I'm going to ask you about shortly. It's literally a 30-second response. How are we going to do all this stuff that we've painted this picture of what 2 years will look like? But first I want to go out here and ask, does anyone have a burning question they'd like to ask the panel? Gosh, not a single person. Have you all tweeted your questions? Well, I'm not seeing Twitter, I'm afraid. So, gentleman in the middle.
Hello, it's John from Hotwire again.
Again.
Where do you think paid for channels sit in all of this? Because I think, sort of, certainly from my perspective, SEO is kind of dead, certainly the description that you gave at the start of this, but something which PR professionals and comms professionals haven't quite got to grips with yet is using paid for channels to enhance campaigns, content, whatever we want to call it. So where do you think that sits in the scale?
In terms of paying for stuff, I think as a PR person, then actually there's a different context to that versus other marketing disciplines, and there's the whole question mark of how an integrated campaign works then. But certainly if you're talking about influencers and talking about gaining coverage through paid for content and sponsored content, I still stand by what I said at the last My News Night event, which is it's like paying for sex. You only have to do it if you're not engaging enough to get it for free. And
that's not necessarily true, because you're buying entry to another club. People liked what you had before, you're going to see more of those people, and they'll like what you've got, just like...
So, yeah, I mean, so would you apply that to promoted tweets or Facebook advertising as well? Then?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, if a promoted tweet that goes viral, as in turns into a trending topic because it's promoted, it's a rarity. Also, if you look at Facebook, I think actually if you want to get any traction through a story on Facebook, absolutely you're going to need to pay for it because Facebook is making sure that's the case. But that's why people like us should be looking for ways to usurp that. Like SEO used to be about ways to get around Google, but in an opposite fashion, in that Google was trying to protect the authenticity of the story and the credibility of the story. It's our job to make it something you can't ignore. Just like going to a journalist, you should have a story. It doesn't matter if you've known them for 10 years, if you were their best man. If it's not a story, they're not going to run it. Just like if you've got a story and you've never met, the journalist will run it if it's a story. People will talk about things that are a story. And social media is doing exactly that. It's allowing people to talk and share things. So it's rare that your content will be the bit that's shared, but absolutely media articles are the #1 trending topics always. So that's why Mashable makes gets such traction. It's why BuzzFeed has built a whole model around it. The idea that you need this third-party content to actually be disseminated. And that's why PR is in this power position in digital communications that actually people are a little bit afraid of. But that idea that we can generate credible third-party coverage of your story that then is getting shared and actually sidesteps the idea of needing to pay for it.
I agree and disagree. So I think that I understand where you're coming from, but I think it also depends on what brands you work with. So we work with unknowns and we're trying to make them known. So in a very practical example, say we have an opinion piece on Real Business, for example, about a particular topic, put in some spend behind that, then a particular article to try and get it to reach other entrepreneurs if they're trying to get in front of investors or a speaker slot or something, actually does help. So it's a minimum spend just to amplify something. In that context, it does seem to work. So we need to understand, or my team need to understand how to do that in order to get that desired result. And it is a new skill, but it's not a hard thing to do. You just, again, talk to the right person, find out what you need to do, and away you go. There's some practical elements, like what you do with the budget and getting the company to pay you up front, or having like a buffer. And some agencies I've heard have got into trouble because of the spend that they're not accounting for, how they do the practical side of the spend. So to your question about like how, and in a couple of years, and we'll get to that, but it changes a lot of things, so you have to tweak your business model in order to be able to manage it. But I do think that paid for is something that's interesting.
Thanks,
for us.
Jen. Thank you for your question. We've got 5 minutes to go, and I want to give the panel a chance to get to that how point. But there's time possibly for one more question if anyone else has one they'd like to ask. Now is your time. No? Okay.
It's a bad
So,
sign.
yeah, save. So we've got 5 minutes, and what we've come to right now, and your question is a good example of it, John, actually. This is the landscape we recognize. We're looking at a place that's shifting. We're looking at some, still I would argue, confusion amongst many of us in this room probably as to what the hell actually is SEO. And we're seeing, as the title of this session is entitled, The Rise of the Brand Story. Yet, one of the questions I asked, or the points that I made in the early part of this session, was talking about how do we differentiate ourselves? How do we get our story noticed rather than Joe Bloggs' story? And there are 500 of Joe Bloggs' story out there we're competing for attention with. In all the ways that whatever we've defined as the measurable goals we're trying to achieve, either for our client or our employer. So let me come back to our panel, to the point on the previous ending we had before asking this question about recognizing the landscape and the need to do X to achieve this place we've outlined in 2 years' time. My point is how. How do we do this? Very specifically how. Not we need to do X. What do we need to do to make that reality in 2 years' time? If I could ask each of you 1 minute response to that question. How? Lukasz.
So I will answer like an SEO, okay? If your all competitors doesn't do any on-page stuff and you are doing on-page stuff, you can be step or couple of steps ahead. Because I have 1 minute, I cannot even cover one person. That's why, but I see like you have laptops so you can write the names. I will give you a couple of platforms. You can go home and in your kitchen or bedroom check how they works. One is DeepCrow, another one SEMrush, and a couple of maybe if you really want to learn how it works, Udemy course, Quick Sprout course, and a couple of magazines like Search Engine Journal, Search Engine Land, moz.com. You can read this. This is not a rocket science, and even if you invest a little of money to start using these platforms and you have nobody who understands SEO in your company, you can rely on your developers or your content writers. Majority of this direction they will understand, and that will help a lot. That's my advice for today.
Thanks, Lukasz. Carlos.
I think the answer is twofold. I think one is around demystification of SEO and upskilling and just beginning to understand what's required there. I think the second part is potentially more theoretical but even more pertinent. Strategy needs to cascade throughout the different elements of an organization. A brand strategy, a content strategy, a digital content strategy, a search strategy, a PR strategy, all have to layer up. Putting those parameters in place and having a clear line of sight for those parameters is absolutely critical. Having a strat on a page is potentially the single most useful thing that brands can do, and probably the one thing that they don't do. Creativity thrives within constraints like that. That's when you really see brands begin to excel.
Cool, thank you. Max?
I think the how comes from, like a lot of things that are changing in PR, the how comes from understanding why it's so important. And that is deferred from once you really start to get into the opportunities to measure PR properly these days and to see, not coverage, but PR traffic from PR sources or incoming leads going through a customer journey in Google Analytics. When you really start looking at that, that helps you understand and gives you the fire underneath you to know why it's so serious and why the long tail of PRs need to up their game in that area as they do with all these other areas. So if you start at the end, you understand why you should be scared about it as a PR. I think that's the key to saying, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to read those amazing sources, I'm going to make sure the strategy all ties through and actually changing things over time.
Great, thank you, Max. Jem?
I think we need to collaborate. So whether it's SEO or anything else, it's the PR industry is really shit at collaborating. So you might. So I set up my own agency. I meet other agency founders, and for the most part, panel to besides not these two guys, but they kind of go, you say, oh, I'm struggling with this, or I'm struggling with that. What are you doing with that? And it's like, oh no, it works really well for us. Yeah, everything's fine. And it's like, well, actually, if you look at the tech profession, they meet up, they hack. They're really open and honest. They, if you look at like how they open source stuff, even they're sharing code of things, and we don't do that. Like we're really locked down. Each agency is like, for the most part, quite protective of what they do. So I think to further the entire profession, so I'm kind of going on the top level message, we do need to learn to collaborate and find ways of working together in a more effective way.
Okay.
I agree totally with Jem. I think the industry in general, or the thing that you need to do is take the fences down. Working from an integrated perspective, either with other agencies or other people, means that as an industry, we're going to have to recruit from outside of traditional PR backgrounds. It means that We're going to have to learn new things. Like everyone should be learning to code, just like they should learn how to write a headline in the Sun. And I think that that idea of working with other agencies, like we've worked with Quirk quite a bit, the idea isn't that integrated work is like putting your Lego brick on top of their Lego brick. It's everyone getting together and deciding what the fuck you're building. And I think that is forgotten about. People don't do strategy in our industry enough. People don't actually see the bigger picture a lot of the time. The reason why everyone talked before about it being about outputs and not outcomes is because strategy relates to outcomes, activity relates to outputs, and people are comfortable talking about activity. And the only struggle, the reason why we're here discussing SEO and rise of the brand story at all, is because people see SEO as another activity that they've got to learn to do. And it's not. It's part of the same thing we've always tried to do. It's a new skill set that we need to teach ourselves and bring in new talent, but it's probably the most exciting element of what we're going to have to do in the future, which is build things.
Okay, thank you very much. So my concluding comment on all this would be, this is the landscape. And I think what the panel have shared in terms of how surely cannot surprise any of you in this room at all, because what it means is we've got a bit of work to do here. And no, this isn't going to happen by itself. So read those websites. Get your head around the understanding of how this stuff all works. Find people that you can talk to. And Jem's point, I think, is a really good one. That I go to quite a few tech events, these kind of so-called hacks that are often just conversations about topics of common interest with people, which is how I keep on top of some of the kind of dark stuff that's going on out there that will make itself into the mainstream soon enough. And yet I don't see that in our profession. I'm using the broad communication profession, not just specifically PR. So maybe we need to do stuff like that. It isn't formal. These are kind of coalescences of common interest. But they can be facilitated, and maybe that's a terrific place for professional bodies like the CIPR to be. But this is the landscape that we recognize. This is what this panel thinks 2 years ahead will look like, perhaps, and some tips, if you will, on how to be in that place in 2 years' time. So count this as your starter for 10. Thanks very much.